So I'd like to introduce Liz and Peter this afternoon. Liz Cowans was a geography teacher for over 30 years and also worked as the geography advisor for Newcastle Local Education Authority, winning an Excellence in Cities Award. She then went on to undertake numerous roles within the Ouseburn Trust. As an advisor and volunteer, Liz has helped schools utilise the Ouseburn Valley as an educational environment through resource provision to enhance fieldwork opportunities. She's also submitted various bids for funding within this role. She's worked as a tour guide for both overland and Victoria Tunnel tours. She's been an active and dedicated member of the Geographical Association and particularly this branch, providing themed workshops for teachers and students using the Ouseburn material for a number of years. And we're really pleased to have her back this afternoon and again next week too. I'll tell you more about that later. Peter Glaves was Principal Lecturer in Environmental Assessment and Management at Greenwich University from 1992 to 2006. He then worked part-time as Deputy Director at the Biodiversity, History and Landscape Research Institute from 2006 to 9, as well as being Principal Lecturer in the Department of Environment at Manchester Metropolitan University from 2007 to 2010. He was Associate Professor of Environmental Management and Director of Enterprise and External Engagement at Northumbria University from 2010 to April this year. Peter is now a Sustainability and Environmental Management Advisor, providing specialist training, lecturing and mentoring in aspects of environmental management, sustainable development and conflict management and community empowerment. So this afternoon, Liz and Peter are going to run through census data. Liz is going to start us off with the old data, I believe from the 1911 census, and then Peter will come in with the most recent census, the 2011 census, and show you a little bit, I think, about using it in exam questions as well as independent investigation use. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that Liz, you can share yours.
Right, okay.
Off you go.
Here we go. Can you see it now on yours or not?
It will take a moment to come up. Not yet. That looks better. There we go. Wonderful.
Hit the button at last. Okay, are we off? We're going? Righty-ho. Welcome everybody to this afternoon's PowerPoint and discussion of the census data in the Ouseburn. Last week, if you remember, we looked at or a very brief timeline about the conditions that people lived in, about environmental conditions. We were thinking about what work people did, and when we look at the 1911 census, it's right there, because people had to write down on a big sheet what they did, how many people lived there in that particular residence, what did they do, how many children were there. So really and truly, as we just go through this, it would be nice for you to think about how many people were there, what kind of conditions were they living in, what work were they doing, what was the environment like. For example, on Stepney Bank and Stepney Street, you have the tanneries, and the smell and the stench from there would have been horrendous. If you worked in the valley floor at the lead works, the dust from the lead processing would get into your lungs, and it would be extremely hazardous to your health. It would kill you. So we're going to look at the census data for 1911, and we're going to see what it shows. So I'm the past and Peter's the present. So here we go. Oh, is it working? No, it's not. Oh yes, so I'm putting this into the idea of the context as well of changing place. because the census can show you how a place has changed, reflecting what's been happening in the area. The census was first started in 1801, and it was based on the idea of births, deaths and marriages, and it was the church. The church was the one that could record, because the vicar or the priest would be essentially the only person who could read and write. So the vicar may have been coming from landowners. Say the lord of the manor had 3 sons. The first one gets the land and the title. The second one goes in and fights. He's in the army. And the third one would be shunted off to the church. So all of these people who were working in different parishes could read and write, and they recorded people who were living there. So I'm slow here, aren't I? There we go. The census itself was taken every 10 years from 1801. Except when you had wars and people are out of the country, especially the Second World War. Census material here is for the 1911 census, and you can go, in an ideal world, into a library or Blandford Street, the Discovery Museum. You can access different census materials. You can also go on a site called Find My Past. That's really good, but you have to sort of subscribe to it. But sometimes you can get a free trial. 1911 is one of the best years because it shows that each household has its own sheet, and it's usually very clear. So this is, remember, this is going to be secondary data. As you'll see when we look at the sheets, it's all copyright. But according to the Archive and Census Manager, you only release the census data 100 years after the census was taken. So in 2021, you will get the 1921 data released. So most of the data, census data, which has been released, it came from 1911, which is, it's a good one to have. Remember also that if we're using this and you're doing any kind of field work, or you're going out and looking at things, if it's your photograph or it's your sketch, then obviously you take credit. But if it's somebody else's, then you obviously have to give a reference to who took the photograph or who it belongs to, in case you get done for copyright. The census sheets are no different. They've got copyright down the side. So to get over this, I rang up the census people in London and got a letter to say that we are allowed to use the census sheets for educational research and for educational use. So we're all right using them. So that's something which is good. So this is a census sheet. England and Wales, Scotland must have had its own arrangements. It was handwritten. Unfortunately, most of the time you can actually read what people have written down. It tells you a lot. It tells you a lot about the housing and the social conditions that people lived in. At the end there, you've got your Crown copyright, and that is important. It has to be observed in a sense. In the first column, it tells us about who's living there. And funnily enough, they're called Cowan. I'm Cowans, but this is Cowan, very, very popular local name. Tells you the date, the age of the people, and it tells you who's living there. It tells you, are you a widower? Are you married? Are you single? Are you 8 months old? It also tells you what jobs you do. So this one tells you about a labourer, somebody works in the pottery, the two at the bottom go to school, and it will tell you where people have come from, where were they born. One of the best things, the worst things, is that at the bottom it tells you how many rooms they lived in. This is not a big room, this is a small room, a really tiny room where you've got there 5 people living. So I chose census data for this workshop, which started off at Stepney Street, Stepney Bank, Lime Street and Ouse Street. And you could use these streets to find out what kind of pattern of working you could see? Was there a pattern? Were there any changes? Do you want to refer to the 1881 census? Are there some industries which aren't as popular? Are they starting to fail, or are they on the way up? They also help to tell you whether or not industries were linked together. The pattern of industry and work within the valley is very, very tight, and it's very similar to South Wales. There wasn't a lot of land, expansion wasn't really looked at, and you were very conscious of keeping your economic costs, transport costs, as low as possible, and thinking, were industries linked together? Of course they were. I chose a section, nice map this one, from Stepney Street at the top, going down to the bank where it gets steeper, hang a right and you come along Lime Street, and then you come along Ouse Street. And the question was, why did I choose those three streets? Answers on a postcard. Answers, well, it's a good transect, and it was easy, and the streets were linked together, and also they were on the left-hand, the west side of the valley, where you could actually see where the houses were on either side. On the eastern side, you have large factories, and you don't really get to any housing until much further along the valley side. So we're using basically three streets. If you are doing research, come the day that you can get out and go to the library, there's something called a wards directory, and it will tell you exactly what was on each of the different streets, whether they were shops, whether they were public houses. Lime Street's there. There was a coal merchant, a shopkeeper, a slipper manufacturer, a shopkeeper. Somebody made sailcloths. There was an end of Stepney. There were millers. There were also different people who would be producing different services for people who lived on the street. Linkages, sand would come in on ships on ballast. What would you use it as? Well, glassworks, of course. Flint, potteries, you had local pottery mines. People would bring this into the area. You had flax, you had livestock, and you could link up different industries. And could you find any information? Could you find any clues on the actual census itself? I think Peter will be talking about different information that you can get from different census data, but also from different investigations. But for the census itself, it gave you just a broad skeleton about the type of housing. Well, look, we've got three areas to look at. And obviously it will tell you about the type of housing. Mainly rented, mainly one room. You were posh if you could afford two. It was very, very crowded. I don't know where they did the cooking. The toilet was in the backyard. So there was overcrowding. It was run down. Probably most of the houses built turn of the 1790s, 1810, they were old and they were falling apart. There was no running water. Was the sewerage? No sewerage, obviously the pipes. So there would be no water there to actually produce any kind of waste disposal. And then it tells you about, was the heavy industry? Where were people born? How old are you? How long have you been living there? You can choose to use that information yourself. Also, street names. Street names are useful in the sense that if you look at Lime Street, why was it called Lime Street? Well, there was a lime kiln in the middle, and hence people called it Lime Street. And you can see where the houses are to the west of the actual kiln. Apparently it would burst with hot materials coming out of the top. And if you're too close to it, you caught fire because you would get all these cinders falling on you, which was a bit of a local health hazard. Stepney Bank was named after Stepney House, big house on the west side of the street. So one option would be to take one street. Could you take one street? This is a sort of possibility. and find out about where people lived, about the different kinds of housing. And Lime Street is really nice. We'll look at that in a minute because it's got the numbers of the houses on it, so it's much easier. And you can see there where the numbers of the houses are. There were a lot of public houses in the Ouseburn because of the quality of the water. The beer had to be obviously boiled to get rid of the germs. First location is Brown Jug Yard on Stepney Bank. It was a Duca's brewery. You had general shops that you had there, and the Brown Jug Yard was behind. It was a tenement. What did you get? There it is on the map on Stepney Street, not the bank, Stepney Street. That was before it really starts to dip down. All right, here we've got 6 Brown Jug Yard. Which looks all right, doesn't it? You've got 6 people living in 2 rooms. That's not too bad. The interesting bit is, what do people, as your 6 people, what do you do for a living? Coal was still prime on the River Tyne. Northumberland and Durham still working. The guy in the house, in the room, he was a coal trimmer. When the coal came down, say from, I don't know, Elsick or wherever, it came in chunks and he had to trim it down so that you could actually put it on a shovel and put it into the boiler. The wife was a fur puller. She was a furrier. And she would pull the soft rabbit down or the fur off the skins. Sometimes they made them into muffs, but she would be working from home and it would be piecework and she would be paid a pittance. So that particular example gives us information about what people did, and the other people, obviously it was the engine works. Lime Street, my second location, it shows a group of children. Children were outside because if you lived in one room with everybody else, your only sanctuary was to play out. And the other thing, of course, for this one is that houses are built into the bank. Water would run down straight into the houses, and the conditions, the social conditions here would be dampness. Health conditions would also be quite bad because you're living cheek by jowl with other people, and if one child was poorly, then it would spread through the entire household. So dampness, roofs that didn't fit, windows that didn't fit and that were broken, and people would be living in freezing conditions during the winter. But what can this tell us? Well, it tells us, first of all, it can locate the exact location of the house. And here we have 33. See it there, 33. Dunlop is quite a common area name. And in this particular situation, what did he do? Well, he worked at Swan Hunters, which would be along the river. And what was he? He was a rivet heater. When you made, obviously, I'm an expert on this, so I can tell you all about it because I do it at the weekend. No. They'll be taking 2 pieces of metal with a hole poked through, and the rivet would go through and join them all together. So he would heat it up, and it could be red hot. Take it out with tongs, pass it to the person next to him, could be his wife, so he had to get on, pass it to her, and she would take it in tongs and throw it up to the man up on the ladders. His apprentice would catch it, and he would ram it into the hole to join the 2 pieces of metal together, slam the hammer on it, and there'd be another man at the back. So he was working in shipbuilding, a very skilled job, I would think that would be very exhausting. He would get paid better than a lady who made muffs. The other one, note the children as well. They love being in the pictures. Note 2 outside toilets. This is Mordew's yard. This is further along, and this is on Ouse Street. About 1935. Children playing out is what they did. And you can see Mordew's yard. This is where the maps come in. But also you can see something else. There are 9 people living in 2 rooms, and one of them is a boarder. It's not a whole family, it's a boarder. And that's heavy population, it really is. But they all come from Byker. So they are local people. One's a carter, and the other people, apart from the fact you've got a general labourer, they work in a rag factory and sorting old clothes. It would have stunk, and they would have had to choose and sort all of the rags, again, probably working on piecework. So that's me finished. That's the information which you could get from a census. It is basic information which is enough to give you a snapshot of what people's lives were like. But Peter's going to talk about something which is far more exciting and giving you lots and lots of information. So that's me finished. Over to you, Peter. Oops, sorry. That's me. Stop sharing.
Okay. Okay, hello. My name's Peter Glaves. Thank you for that introduction earlier. It's quite weird when you almost don't recognise yourself in your history, but here we go. And Liz, thanks very much for that context in terms of the 1911 census. I've been asked for the rest of the session today to go through with you a little bit about the most recent census and other up-to-date data sources which you might be able to use in your studies. There's 2 themes I want to do today, one of which is a little bit about where you might find useful data, and the other aspect is some suggestions about how you use that data. And I realise my name's not appeared, so that's me. My name's Peter Glaves. Now, I've got half an hour today to cover quite a lot with you, and that I'm going to look at several websites for data sources. It's really easy when you're looking at data sources to get buried in that data, to get lost in the information. So if people are interested, what I've done is I've made available a PDF document, which hopefully you can see on screen. I've got some nods, and on there you will see census related data and a list of websites, data relating to health and well-being, some planning and some environmental. So Liz earlier was talking about questions like how many people have you got, populations, questions about what are the living conditions, health and well-being and environment. And there's a number of sources where you can look for more modern data about those. I'm now going to try and go back to my PowerPoint. And let's get on to the talk. So why might you be using this data? What data might you be using? Looking at what was covered last week, if you were here for the workshop, there are 2 ways you might want to use them in your geographical studies. The first is in developing some answers for an exam. And in that case, you get marks within exams, and it's always useful in exams to have case studies that illustrate certain key themes. The other thing, if you're doing your A-levels, is that you may have investigations, projects coming up, and that the data we're looking at here might give you some ideas of data and research questions that you could use in your own investigation. Kath last week talked about some geographical curriculum areas which might be relevant for exam questions or for investigations about changing places. So we've got 1911 data, current data. We can look at changes over time or comparisons between now and then. The contemporary urban environment. Again, current data sources tell you a lot about those urban areas. Population and environment. we can look at changes in population, and we can link that to changes in environment, how increasing population perhaps has changed the environment, or how the environment has changed the population. And other areas that were touched on last week as examples about resource and ecosystems. I've put on the bottom some of all my slides, a couple of things to look at. Liz used Seas with You. I do a slightly different version, which is PESEL. In answering these questions, you might want to look at economic dimensions, social dimensions, environmental dimensions, political or other factors. In looking at data, you might want to ask yourself questions about what is happening? Why is this happening? When did something happen? Where? What are we looking at? Some broad questions for you to think through. Now, before you leap in and start to look at these data sets on your own or with your teachers, one or two things for you to think about. The first one of these is nowadays there is a huge amount of data and there are lots of websites you can look at. Now, anyone who's gone onto a website in an evening and started to look at something that they're interested in, have any of you found about 2-3 hours later, you've ended up somewhere over here, having started over there, and you're not quite sure how you got there or what you found? It's easy with these web sources to just get lost in the mass of data. So before you start looking at that information, I'm suggesting that you need to be quite selective in the sites you look at and in the questions and data that you're looking for. Why not, before you look at these websites, think about two things. What is it, the question I'm trying to answer? That might be an exam question about changing places. It might be your own investigation about populations and environment. I'm interested in a question about the Ouseburn Valley, about population density, renting houses, housing conditions, other environmental factors. If that was my question, what data or evidence might I be looking for that would help me answer that question, understand this place? Think what it is I'm looking for before you go looking. Now, analysis that you might want to do with this data, Liz was talking about the 1911 data and what that's showing, and you could take the current data now, and a very simple thing would be to do is, how does the data now compare to the past? We're looking here at comparing and contrasting for an answer, aren't we? Population density 1911, population data 2011. Housing conditions 1911, housing conditions 2011. So taking different elements of those areas at the two times and bringing them together to show what is similar, what is different. The other thing that you can do with some websites is you can actually produce Excel spreadsheets, tables that will show you every 10 years what's happening, say, with population. So you could look at patterns and trends over time. So things to think about beforehand. What is it I'm looking for in terms of a big question? What evidence might I be looking for? And how might I go about analysing that data? Keep those in your head and you're more likely to stay a bit focused. You're more likely to get less lost in the data. So again, here are some answer plans from last week's session when Kath was talking about example answers from the planning workshop. So one of the questions, this one here, is to what extent have economic characteristics affects people's lived experience of a local place you've studied? What is the question being asked? For question 2, what evidence might be useful as a case study for the Ouseburn to help me answer that question and get a good mark in the exam? What is it I might be looking for of evidence about economics and about people's lives in 1911 perhaps, and in 2011? Hopefully that makes sense. The phrase we're looking at here is directed reading or directed searching. searching with a purpose, searching with a reason. So, as I said a few minutes ago at the start of the session, I'm going to run through now quite a lot of websites. I'm going to try to go from PowerPoints to the actual web pages themselves. I've only got a short time, so I've got, what, 20 or so minutes to show you through several websites. So I'm going to go fairly quickly through these. You've got the opportunity with the web addresses that I'll send you on the handout to spend a bit of time having a look through them, spending time on your own computer or perhaps in lessons, actually exploring them more. All I can do really now is give you a flavour of where are the websites, what they might tell you. Please don't get lost in the data that's there. I'm just giving you a flavour, a taste. I would say Thomas Cook, but they've gone bankrupt, haven't they? So Hayes Travel Tour of the websites that are available. So to start off with, and the one I was asked to focus on most, is the census data. So as Liz was saying, censuses run every 10 years. The most recent one of these was 2011 in most areas of England and Wales. I'm saying most areas because there was a trial done in 2017 of some parts of the UK. This was because the next census, the 2021, is going to be an online version. Previous ones tended to be paper. And what they've done is a trial run of that. And for some areas, there is actually some more recent data available. What I will have to say is that there is no 2017 data for the northeast of England. The nearest is Sheffield. So the data you're looking at is 2011. Now, proviso with you in 2011. For those of you who are a school pupil watching, how old were you in 2011? Were you 5 or 6 or something? Now, if I said to you, I was going to take some information about you in 2011, and I would use that information to say what you're like now, do you think that would be fair? Has anything changed since 2011 in your life? And if it has anything changed in the bigger population in these areas? So 2011 is the most recent census, but it isn't exactly how things are now. It's almost 10 years ago. There's been some changes. Be a little bit careful then in saying today or current isn't, it's a little bit old. There is a website where you can go on to look at this data, and this website will give you information about the 2011 census, and it will also give you information about how that data was collected and how to analyze it. So if you look up here, here's a screen grab from the 2011 census, the ONS one here, and this gives you a user guide, and it tells you about how to collect data and analyze and pull them down. You can also, from this same site, access data from the 1911 census, the 1801 census, and other 10-year blocks. So you could run and look at different years. Having said it covers lots, it's quite a complex website to use, and it's not the one I'd recommend. It's a little bit confusing. It's hard to work through. So I'm going to suggest some other websites if you want to look at the 2011 website that are much more user-friendly, are much easier for you to get hold of data, download it, do something with it. So one of these to look at is UK Data Explorer. UK Data Explorer is a nice visual mapping of England and Wales. It does it by regions. You can see some screen grabs here, all of England, London, South East, Yorkshire, East Midlands, North East, etc. The bad thing about this is it only does it to fairly large geographical areas, wards. It gives you a portrait of what things were like at that point. Because it's only giving you these big data areas, these large geographical areas, it can't give you to individual houses. It can't give you data to individual streets. It's what we call coarse data. It's big, rough data that's there. What you can do is compare different areas, and it gives you a bit of a picture of the area that you're looking at. So here's where I'm going to try to see if I can share with you the actual web page. Ooh, hello, that's interesting. Bear with me a second. PowerPoint, it's not showing me the, oh, marvelous. Okay, bear with me a second. I'm going to have to stop sharing and go back to Firefox. And then we're going to try again to do a share. And hopefully I can get Firefox to work this time. My screen, there we go. So, oops. Can you see UK Data Explorer on screen? What you can see on there, all of the UK, different regions, northeast. If I select on the northeast map, you see it shows the whole region. I can zoom in, ooh, a bit far north. That's there. Where are we? I've lost Newcastle, gone way too far away, that's there. What you'll see is it shows you for these big blocks of areas, and for each area it gives you a colour, and for that colour it's telling you about certain data. So I could, using this information, get information about the different age structures within those wards, information about living arrangements, information about how many people are lone parents, identity. There's a huge amount of information I could look at there, isn't there? So amongst that might be information about the health of people. Remember Liz was talking about health conditions in 1911, or information about populations. It's a good website if what I want to do is compare big areas against other areas and look for visual patterns and groups and changes that are there. If I want to focus down in a bit more detail at a specific site, then there's another site I might want to look at, and this is Nomis Web. Nomis Web is labour market statistics. It's a census related website, but it's a slightly different approach, and it allows you to zoom in on more local data. So much better if you wanted to compare the Ouseburn Valley or part of it and surrounding, and maybe compare to the data that Liz was talking about in 1911. One thing it does allow you to do is to search at various scales, including putting a postcode in. So if you can see my pointer, it says postcode or area name on the website there. Other good things, it allows you to select data and download them as a table in Excel or whatever, so you can run your own analysis, maybe put it into reports, use it, etc. And the data it gives you links really nicely to the data Liz was talking about, because it gives you data about who is in a particular area, data about how they're living in that area, data about what they're doing in that area. And those questions are the kind of questions that Liz was talking about in the 1911 census, aren't they? Similar kind of questions that we're looking at. So let's again try and go and have a look at Nomis. So this is the Nomis website, and I've written a postcode in here. This is the postcode for 7 stories, so nicely there in the centre of the Ouseburn. If I do a search for that, it gives me the data, and I can then pick the kind of analysis I want to do. And there's an option down here, which is the smallest area for which data is available. So if I want to look at a small area, this is the best one to pick. I've also got an option saying, would I like to include the parent area, the bigger geographical area, in my analysis as well? So this would give me data for part of the Ouseburn and the city of Newcastle upon Tyne. So I'm going to choose the smallest area and the parent area. And the smallest areas you can see is covering Lime Street, Stepney Bank, the area Liz was talking about, but it is a little bit bigger. It covers this area to the west as well. Remember, the data is about who. I'll zoom in a little bit so we can see the text a little bit bigger. Ooh, gone a bit that's there. Who we are, so data on population, living arrangements, how people are living, whether they're owning their houses or renting, whether they're in employment or not, information about what they're doing, employment, unemployment, etc. Now there's lots of data. Oh, look, shall I scroll down? Are you feeling seasick yet? Can you understand what I said earlier? It's easy to get lost. So let me just pick an example for you that might illustrate this. So what example might be interesting to look at in terms of these areas? So as you can see, we've got this output area, which is part of Ouseburn, the comparative data for the whole of Newcastle upon Tyne, and the comparative data for the whole of England. We have in the output area of Ouseburn 124 people living out of a population of 280,000 in Newcastle and 53 million within England. If that table was of interest, I could download it into Excel and do some analysis with it myself in my own time. If we look at, say, the age of the population, in the area we're looking at of Ouseburn, there's a bit of an absence of children, isn't there? We've got 3 very young children, no one between 5 and 10, one 10 to 14-year-old, a gap of teenagers. If you compare that to Newcastle, there's a lot more individuals of these children age groups, isn't there? So that's probably telling us about the age population. If we look at the older population, 14% of people between 65 and 74, so that is 11% of the population compared to 6.9% of Newcastle, 8.6% nationally. So we've got an older population, lack of young children, and we've also got a little bit more people of the 30s, 45 range compared to Newcastle as well. So our population's a little bit different. We could look at living arrangements or ethnic groups, but the other thing that Liz talked about earlier, if I scroll down, lots of data, isn't there? Language, religion, health and provision of unpaid health. And here we've got, are your day-to-day activities limited a lot by your health condition? And 22% of the people responding in this part of the Ouseburn say their health status limits what they can do. That compares to 9.5% in Newcastle, 8.3% nationally. So there's a lot of people here with health problems, isn't there? Now, I will say in that area, there's a particular home which is for people who are of a certain age and with health issues, so that might bias it. But there's clearly some health problems in this area. There's clearly a different age population in this area. Remember, this is just the upper part of the Ouseburn Valley. If I took a different postcode, I could look at the lower part near the Tyne, and I would probably find a very different population, very different issues in those areas that's there. I could look at economic activity, the kind of jobs they're looking at and involved in. So maybe scroll down a little bit further. Adults, no adults in employment in the household, 56%. So are they retired and not economically active? Young? Well, no, there's very few children. Maybe they're students. There's something happening here, isn't there? So I've just picked 1 or 2 issues here about employment, about population age structures, about health. And you can begin to see if I'm looking for particular questions or differences, I might start to see some patterns that allow me to compare 1911 to 2011, or compare to this area, to the city, to the country. Now, those compare and contrasts are really useful answers for exams and for project investigations. There's other websites that will show data in a different way. This is a website called DataShine. And as you can see, the outputs are very graphical, aren't they? Last website we looked at, lots of tables, lots of numbers. Here, the colors are telling us high to low, giving us lots more information. So if you're looking for visual analysis, DataShine is great, and it allows you to look at multiple parameters and information. So let's go and have a quick look at this website. And I can show you a little bit about what it can do. So here is DataShine. I can put a postcode in here, the same one, do a Go search. And I forgot I'd already done it, so here's the site already that's there. I could then zoom in a little bit if I want to, and you'll see this is giving me resolution. If I move the River Ouseburn towards the centre around this area. If you look along the top here, I can pick some types of data. I can look at population data, health data, housing data, etc. So here's some health data, and this is general health. So here we're looking at very good health to very poor health, and you can see, look at the colour differences along the riverside, lots of reds, moving up oranges, moving up the Ouseburn, we're getting more into the yellows. As we're moving from here to here, something's happening about general health, isn't it? We're moving from this part, which is the very good, down to the lower. We could look at long-term health issues. We could look at employment factors that are there. So the number of people in professional occupations or skilled trade, the number of people in elementary occupations where you're not needing a lot of qualifications to get there. And again, if we look at professional occupations, lots of reds moving into the yellows as we go north. If we look at elementary occupations, the colours have flipped, haven't they? We've got lots at one end here, reds, lots down there. So there's something different happening in the upper compared to the lower Ouseburn that's visually this is telling me. Maybe I can start to look at those in a bit more detail. So this is DataShine, and DataShine is brilliant at showing you visual trends and patterns and distributions. You are able to download these maps as PDFs. So you could use these maps in your analysis, say in your independent report, maybe link to a table shown from the previous website and maybe do a bit of a comparison that's there. Now, the other factor that Liz talked about was quality of life, health, condition, all of those elements that are there. And there is something called the Index of Multiple Deprivation survey that's done. Now, what's interesting with this is, unlike the census, which is 2011, there were surveys done in 2015, and as you can see the map here, 2019, so it's more recent data. There is another website you can look at by postcode. There's another website I've not got time to talk through, which is Thriving Places, but this is looking at the same kind of issue. It's looking at how well people are doing, the quality of their life, the level of deprivation that they're living in. So again, I'm just going to quickly show you the website for the Index of Deprivation. And what I've done here is zoomed in to, for 2019, can you see here the river running up? Now, if I zoom out a little bit, it will start to give me information for different parts of Newcastle and surroundings. And can you see different colours here? We're going from the darker colours, the most deprived, to the paler colours, the least deprived. And there's something interesting happening between the west and the east side, but notice it's for quite big geographical areas, this, isn't it? So it's more current data, but it is less accurate, less precise in the area it's telling you. So there's lots of things you can look at in terms of here. This is for the total deprivation, or we could look at employment, or we could look at education, economics, crime, or let's look at health. So again, in terms of the health, there's something interesting happening, isn't it, as you go from northern parts of Newcastle down towards the riverside, how the levels of health drop. You've got people with a lot more health problems, a lot of issues that are coming through there. So you're now beginning to probably go, oh my God, lots of data sources, lots of things to look at. All I'm doing is saying lots of things. Remember the questions at the beginning. What is it I'm trying to find out? What data might be useful? Pick the website that fits the information you're looking for. And you might look at maps like this that give you color codes saying something's happening. And then you might look for other websites that tell you data. Other information you might want to look at, and just checking my time, I've got about 5 minutes left. Is that right? Yeah, okay. Other information you've got is the local authority plans for your area. So you might just about see there's a map here. We're losing the Ouseburn on the bottom, which covers the whole of Newcastle. And I've zoomed in on this map here. That's a map for the local plan for the city of Newcastle upon Tyne. And that tells us some information about the current area. And it also tells us some information about what development needs there are in particular areas, like the Ouseburn, and what are the proposals for building in those areas around the Ouseburn as well. Now, for Newcastle upon Tyne, there's a link to the map of the city, and all these different coloured dots are telling you different planning designations and proposals. And there's links to a huge number of documents. Again, it's easy to get buried. Here, for example, we're looking around the area. You can see Shieldfield up here. The river's difficult to see coming down. And you might see different colours like the greens linked to protected open spaces. Different coloured lines and dots linked to different kinds of roads and access that's there. It's a nice geographical data. Again, where the stadium is on this OS map, helping you more clearly see where things are in relation to the river. There are lots of local planning documents as well that relate to them. And if you want up-to-date information, the most recent one is March this year. And that's why it's useful. It's not 2011, it's now. So let me show you an example of this document. It's 2021. So here is a list, and I've given you the website, all of these web links to the documents. And here is an extract from, if I zoom back to the beginning, way, page 43. Sorry, my scroll function's gone to one side. Bear with me. Let's try to zoom to the first page. So this is the March 2020 policy for developments in the area up to 2030. And all I've done is look for a search for the word Ouseburn. And you'll notice that the Quayside and Ouseburn is a separate sub area for development. So does it say anything in the text about the area? So here it tells me the Ouseburn area includes the quayside and the valley extending up to Spillers Mill and the stadium. It tells me anything else. It gives me a link to the fact that there's an Ouseburn Central Master Plan and there's a Lower Ouseburn Design Framework. Oh, hello, there might be documents that tell me more. I've got the names of them, I can search for them. If I search further on in the document, we're wanting to do things in terms of linking access for pedestrians and cycling into the Ouseburn from a city centre. anything else. If I search on, there's a master plan, there's other documents I can look at. So I could look within them and it might tell me information about development, social problems. It's what we call a content search. You're looking for information that's there. So last couple of minutes for you. I know I'm burying you with lots of data. You're probably going, oh my God, too much to look at. Environmental data. If you want to, the Environment Agency has a lot of data sets about local areas. What's in my backyard is the old name for it. They're changing that name nowadays. But if you look down the side here, it's got information on flood risk. It's got information on coastal erosion. Farming's maybe less of an issue. In Ouseburn, we've got Ouseburn Farm, but problems that's there. Air quality information that's there. There's lots of information that you can look at. There's also a bigger environmental data set called Magic. Don't ask me why. That's the name that it's called. And in both of those websites, if it's okay if I overrun for a minute or so, and just show you them that they exist. This is the Environment Agency website. So we've got water quality data that's there, if we wanted to look at. And flood risk data. If I wanted to look at long-term flood risk for an area, I could do a search for NE1, 2, PQ, and see if 7 stories was likely to be flood risk. I could do this for my own house. Low surface water, view a map of flood risks from those areas, and it can begin to show me, have I got high risks of flooding from different issues for different locations? The Magic website, again, allows me to look at data for lots of things like habitat data, land schemes, aerial photographs, huge amount of stuff that you can look for. I'm sure you've now reached the point of, will you stop showing us websites, please, because we're losing the will. Key things to take away from you is not all this detail. Why not use particular locations as case study or examples for developing plans for your exams and perhaps for future investigations? There's lots of information out there, but you need to be selective. Before you look at the websites, think about, what's the topic I'm investigating? Is it social and economics, urbanization, populations? What are the questions that I might be looking at in my investigation, or I think might come up in an exam, and what evidence and examples might be useful for them? And once you've got a question in mind, look at 1 or 2 of these websites, and there's lots of data buried there that might help you with that. Hopefully in the last half an hour, I've shown some examples and just illustrated a little bit about what's there and how to get to them. Easiest thing to do now is just play. Why not pick the Ouseburn or where you live and actually see what information it tells you and see if it's telling you something interesting. So I have in half an hour done something that I could probably have done in several days. It's a flavour, it's a taste. I'm going to shut up now and see if there's any questions that people would like to follow. And take a drink of water. Okay, I know someone was 9 in 2011, that's good to know.
Okay, I'm going to try and unmute this way. It's refusing to let me click off mute. Any other way? Thank you very much, Peter, and to Liz as well. Really interesting stuff and so much data out there that we can link to census data as well as the actual census data itself. I think there's one short questions come in. If you want to have a look in the chat there, and I'll just take this opportunity to invite other questions. from anybody out there who hasn't, been so busy listening and perhaps scribbling down notes, that you haven't had a chance to type your question in the chat box there, or you raise your hand. There's a raise your hand function if you want to have a look. Like I say, very interesting. It's perhaps worth pointing out that there are some censuses that are missing, aren't there? Like during the World Wars,
Yep.
one lot went up in smoke at the census office. So if those of you who are using census data, especially going back over the years, if you're looking for a year in particular, I don't know if Liz knows much about this. There are some census data sets that are missing. So, if you can't find something, it might be that is actually one of them. One other thing I wanted to just mention, for those of you doing your independent investigation in particular, if you are using downloaded data sets as Excel spreadsheets, like from Nomis Web, if you save those spreadsheets as a .csv file, if it's got a postcode or a latitude, longitude on the data in the spreadsheet, you can upload that as a layer onto your own GIS. And so you can actually create a simple version of a data shine map for your specific area. And that looks really impressive in an independent investigation write-up. So that might be something to think about. One last thing from me before we go to that short question, and that's just to remind you about the NERA archive. NERA archive is the Northeast Regeneration Archive, hosted at Northumbria University, and that is a really useful source of planning documents and all sorts of resources, contemporary ones, current ones, and an archive of old ones as well. So that there's just so much out there. And I think, Peter, you've linked that really, really well to Liz's wonderful race through the old 1911 census data as well. Thank you both very, very much. A short question from Jack Kennedy about DEFRA.
Mm-hmm. Okay. In terms of who's in charge of DEFRA, the person who's overall charge of the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs is George Eustace, who is our Secretary of State for the Environment. You've asked about Henry Dimbleby. Henry Dimbleby is the lead of what's called a non-executive board. So he's one of the advisory boards that's there. As with government departments, there's lots of people have got different roles in managing at a national level, and DEFRA oversees the environmental nature conservation side, which is Natural England, and the more air pollution, water quality side, which is the Environment Agency in England. And in Wales, it's completely different, so I'm not going to go there. And Scotland as well, that's going forward. But DEFRA websites and the Magic website is great. What I would say, it's better for rural areas than urban areas.
There we go. I've managed to unmute. Sorry, it's playing up a little bit. I'm just having a check for other questions coming through. I don't see any others. So I'm going to take...
Would it be useful saying how this week links into next week's?
Yes, that would be really useful. Yeah.
So a lot of what we've talked about this week are number data, quantitative data from the census. So lots of tables of percentages, populations. and we've touched on some visual map data, so different colours showing different deprivation. Next week's looking at qualitative data, in particular how you might use photographs, and those are historical photographs and modern day photographs to help understand about a place. And as you might know, that numbers tell you things, but a photograph of visual evidence tells you perhaps much more about how and what, rather and why's. Numbers tell is more what's there, isn't it? Percentages. It's a bit more explanatory. It gives you a bit more detail. So we're going next week to look at some historical current data photographs and a little bit about how you might, as a geographer, analyse those photographs as evidence or data in your geographical studies.
Yeah.
That was a long sentence.
Yeah. But it gives everyone a really good idea of what we're doing. And I think it just provides such a good contrast with the quantitative primary and secondary data from this week to that qualitative approach. I know a lot of students try and get both quantitative and qualitative data techniques into their independent investigations, and this is such a good way of showing that they're both, equally valid, equally useful in slightly different ways. So I'm really excited about next week's talk. I think it's going to be, really interesting to see what you've put together for us. So yeah, I don't see any other questions. So I'm going to thank you both very, very much for your presentations today. So useful, really interesting. A reminder that there is that handout available. Just get in touch with ga.tyneweir@gmail.com or our secretary or vice chair. Those emails up on the board, up on the screen there.